Hi guys, welcome to Techie Ocean. In this tutorial, we will see how to create template-driven forms with validations. So let's begin. So in the previous tutorials, we have seen how to create reactive forms. So in reactive forms, we have complete control of the form controls in our TS file. In template-driven forms, we cannot access the form controls in our .ts files. That's why we use two-way binding and ng model. So the name itself suggests that it is template-driven, that is more of HTML. So in this example, we'll just create a template driven form. We'll create a form for entering the superheroes and we'll see how to edit the form and put some validations. So as I said, we don't have complete control of the form controls in template driven form. In our .ts file, we have to use two-way binding. That's why we have to import forms model from Angular Forms. And we'll just import it in import section. That is here. Now, as I said, we are going to create a form for entering the superheroes. We'll quickly create a class named as superheroes.ts. New file, superheroes.ts. So we'll create a class named as superhero. We'll declare a constructor. And now we will define all these fields of this class here in the constructor. So we are going to have these fields, that is ID, the name of the superhero, the weapon used by the superhero, the specialty, and the real name of the superhero. So we are going to use these fields and we are going to bind these fields in our HTML. So here the real name is just optional. That's why we are used question mark after the field name. So now let's go to the app.component.ts. We'll just quickly import our superhero class. Now in our superheroes.ts, you can see we are going to keep the name and the real name as simple input text boxes. But for weapon and specialty, we are going to give a drop down. So let's create two arrays for filling these fields. So let's create an array weapons, and we are going to have these values: iron suit, hammer, bow and arrow, shield, and raw power. So this is for the field named as weapon in our superheroes.ts file. Similarly, we will have an array named as specialties, and we'll have all these values: technology, god of thunder, archery, war and leadership, and scientist. So now after doing this, we'll create a model, a new instance of our class named as superhero. So first will be the ID. We are going to provide hardcode value, that is 1, the name, which is Iron Man. We need to provide the weapon. So we have the weapons array. I'm just going to write this dot weapon array and the 0th index, that is iron suit. For specialties, I'm just going to write this dot specialties 0th index, that is technology. And finally the real name, that is Tony Stark. So you can see here we have provided the ID, name, the weapon, the specialty, and the real name to that instance. So we are going to use bootstrap.css here. So I'm going to index.html, and in the head section I'm just going to import this link style sheet. There is bootstrap.min.css. So we are going to use the bootstrap CSS here. So let's go to HTML. So we are going to use a simple HTML5 template for this template driven form. I'm going to have a div, class is container, this is bootstrap class, superhero form. Here I'm going to create a form let's create the first field, that is the name field. So this is HTML5, so I am creating a input of type text and the ID field is name, and this label is using the for attribute and it is binding it for that particular control, that is name, that is this ID name. This is linked with this input text box. So this is simple HTML5. So similarly we will define the rest of the controls. So I am going to define the weapons now. So you can see here we are having a select list and the ID is weapon, and we are looping through all the items of our weapons array and the value is each and every item, and we are just displaying that value here. Simple. So now we are defining the specialty select list. The ID is specialty. We are looping through all the items of the arrays named as specialties, and we are displaying it in the as a text and value, that is these arrays. Now after this comes the last one, that is the real name, which is simple text box. ID is real name. So now we'll have a simple submit button. All these classes belongs to Bootstrap. Now let's run this, and you can see here this is the form which we have created. So we are binding our weapons, we are binding our specialty and a submit button. So now let's bind the model which we have created to this text boxes and select list, that is this model. So let's go to the app.component.html to the first field, that is name. So here in this input I will just write required. So required is nothing but the inbuilt attribute of HTML5 for making a field as mandatory. So after this we are going to write ng model is model.name, that is the one which we have defined in our TS file. So we are binding the name field of the model to this input text box. After this we are giving the name attribute of our input text box as name. We are simply writing it as name. And after that we are going to declare a template reference variable named as name. So this is the variable of this particular input text box. So I will just tell you the use of this. So whenever we are typing something in the input text box in the HTML, the Angular applies the runtime classes to the elements. So let's see that. We'll see that using this reference variable. So below this I am just going to write the template reference name name.class name. So this name is nothing but this. So I'll see when I type something in this input text box how Angular gives class names to this input text box at runtime. So you can see here right now the data is filled here as Iron Man and the class is untouched and ng pristine and ng valid because we are not touched anything. So if I write something here, you can see here that the class at runtime is ng valid, ng dirty and ng touched. If I remove this, you can see that the class is ng dirty, ng touched and ng invalid. So I have to write something here, and depending on that Angular applies the classes to the input. So right now it's valid. So we will use these classes, inbuilt classes which are applied to the input for displaying or hiding the validation messages. So I will just remove this. You have seen how Angular applies the runtime classes to the elements. I will just assign the ng model to this hash name, that is this model.name. This input text box I am just going to write a div for validation message, which you can see here that it is referencing this variable. So you can see here that if name.valid and name.pristine, then this div will be hidden. Otherwise, in other cases, the superhero name is required, div message will be shown. So this name is referencing this. So now we'll make the same changes in weapon and specialty select list. So we are going to make weapon and specialty drop down also mandatory. So let's write this. The select list for weapon is required. ng model is model.weapon, name is weapon, and we are also declaring the template reference variable hash weapon for this particular element. And below this list, we are going to write our validation message, that is if weapon.valid or weapon.pristine, the class, runtime class, then the weapon is required message will be not displayed, which is referencing this variable. Else in other cases, if the input text box value is invalid, then this will be displayed. We are going to do the same thing for specialty select list. We are going to mark it as required, ng model as model.specialty, name specialty, and the template reference variable specialty, and the validation message, that is specialty is required. So now we'll create a separate CSS, custom CSS for displaying the valid control values and invalid control values. That is, we are going to give different CSS for valid controls and different CSS for invalid controls. So in the assets folder, let's create a new file, forms.css, and in this form.css we are going to have two classes. For ng valid, the color will be green, that is border left color will be green, and for ng invalid class, the border left color will be red. So we are defining this so that to differentiate whether the controls are having valid values or not. And you have already seen ng-valid and ng-invalid are the runtime classes applied by Angular to the HTML elements. And we will go to the index.html for importing this created custom CSS file here. This is in our index.html. Now after this is done, let's go to the app.component.html. So here in this form tag, we will define the template reference variable named as superhero form as ng form. So our ng form is our inbuilt Angular form, and this is the template reference variable, that is hash superhero form we are given to this form for referencing this form in HTML. Submit button, I am just going to write disabled equal to not superhero form.form.valid. That is, if the form is valid, then only this button will be enabled, otherwise this button will be disabled. So this is nothing but the variable which we are referencing the form with. Also we'll give the submit event to the form, that is ng submit equal to on submit. We'll quickly define the on submit method. So let's go to app.component.ts. Here we are going to have the on submit method in which we are just writing console.log this.model.name, this.model.weapon, and this.model.specialty, which has been binded here. The name, the weapon, and the specialty. So I'll just have a variable or a flag named as submitted equal to false, and on this submit I'm just going to write this dot submitted equal to true. So this is just to display whatever fields or values which you have entered in the fields. So let's go to app.component.html. this superhero form, I'm just going to write hidden equal to submitted. That means if I click on the submit button, this form will be hidden. And we are going to display whatever values we are typing in these text boxes and select list in another div. So we are going to display it here. So here I'm just going to have the another div. Hidden is not submitted. So you can see this div. This will be hidden only when submitted is false. So you can see superhero name, model.name, real name, model.real name, model.weapon, model.specialty. And when I click on this button which is there in this div, that is the edit button, we are just making submitted as false. So at a time only one of the div will be enabled. That is, when I submit this form, this display div will be enabled, and when I click the edit button, we can again see this particular form. So let's run this. So when I click on submit button, you can see here we are taken to another div where we are displaying the hero name, real name, weapon and specialty. So when I click on edit button, the submitted flag will again turn to false, and you can see the previous form. So when I click on submit, you can also see that the submit function is also called. We are displaying the values here in the console. app.component.html, and we'll quickly have a button for creating a new hero. This was just an edit part for creating a new hero. So below this submit button, I'm just going to write a button, new superhero, and on the click we are just going to call a function new superhero. So let's go to the app.component.ts. So here I'm just going to define a variable id as number. In the ng on init, I'm just going to assign that id field as 0. So now I'm just going to write the new superhero function. This.id is this.id plus 1. This.model equal to new superhero, and I'm just going to pass this id, and I'm going to have other fields as empty. So let's run this. Now if I click on new superhero, you can see that the text box is red. As we had defined previously, the color for ng invalid because we require something here. So as I write something here, that is Thor, and here I will just select hammer, you can see that the colors are changing because these three fields are required fields. If I delete this here, you can see the message is superhero name is required. But when I click on new superhero again, you can see that these messages are still displayed. So you can see here that these messages are displayed even if I click on new superhero. So when I click on new superhero button, this should go away because this is completely resetting the form. So we can call the form.reset method to clear this out. HTML, and after this new superhero method, I'm just going to write superhero form.reset. Reset is the inbuilt method, and superhero form is nothing but the name of our form. So let's run this. I click on new superhero. I type something here like Hulk. I select raw power, and now if I empty this, you can see the superhero name is required, and when I click on new superhero again, this will go away since it's a fresh reset. So thus we have seen how to create the template driven forms and some validations. So that's it guys. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe, like or share.